You're tuned in to the Bleav in Arizona podcast. Hello, Bear Down Believers, and welcome into the show. I'm your host, Matt Reynoldsson, and we've got a loaded pregame show for Arizona versus NAU coming up today. I'll bring in Eric Newman, sports editor for the Arizona Daily Sun, to talk about the Lumberjacks side of things, and I'll also make my picks for the college football weekend coming up later in the show. Before we get to all our content on today's show, I want to remind you to please subscribe to the show over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcasts, and the video versions of these will always be uploaded on my YouTube page at Matt_Reynoldsson, and tell your friends about Bleav in Arizona. That's BLEAV in Arizona. All right, let's bring in Eric Newman from the Arizona Daily Sun, covering the Lumberjacks up in Flagstaff. And Eric, had to feel nice to get a week one win for the Lumberjacks, one of the most prolific offensive performances in program history. I know it was against an independent team, but game one of a new coaching staff had to feel good for the Jacks.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. It was against an independent NAIA opponent, and so you can't really take everything that you might want to away from that game. But it certainly was, something to get them started on the right track. Brian Wright's in there, the new coach. They got a lot of different guys in, and yeah, I mean that's all you can ask for from a game like that. You don't want to get embarrassed, and you want to get a bunch of guys some playing time.
Now, for a lot of people that aren't familiar with NAU's roster this year, it was kind of an overhaul with Brian Wright coming in from Pittsburgh State and really kind of assembling to a certain extent. I know there were some guys, there were some holdovers, but assembling from the transfer portal, really a D2 all-star team. I mean, the MIAA in the central part of the country is considered the powerhouse conference of D2. Pitt State was a top 5 team all year long last year in that conference, also one of the most prolific historic programs in D2. And now Wright comes over from Pitt State and tries to bolster this NAU program, and he brings his quarterback with him. What did you see from Ty Pennington last week, and what did you see so far through camp and through the first week of 2 of preparations for this season of how these guys have acclimated to the Division I level?
So Ty Pennington, when he brought him over, it was, the rumblings were there that he was going to probably compete or maybe even win that starting quarterback job. Angel Flores is a captain on the team. He started the end of the year, but Ty had some significant playing time for the Gorillas, and he was the guy that a lot of people thought was going to come in and get that role potentially. And he's played really well. He's mobile for this level. He's got a good arm, and he's a leader with that team. He's a quiet guy, doesn't want to be the rah-rah type of player, but makes a difference for that squad. And the biggest thing is that Brian Wright trusts him. He's played under him before. He knows that scheme. They brought in a whole new offensive scheme, and so he knows it, and didn't have to learn it on the fly. And again, it's tough because he only played maybe a quarter and a half against Lincoln, and so That's his only game film for NAU, though he has obviously some in the system with Wright. But yeah, I mean, it was positive, and he's learning to get some chemistry with the receivers, things like that. But it's, we're yet to see what it really looks like against another Division I opponent.
Well, that's one of the ways that you develop a roster, though, especially coming in and establishing in your very first game as head coach, which is what Brian Wright did, that, when we have an advantage, we're going to get as many guys on the field as possible. We want everybody to be part of this program. It builds culture. It builds leadership organically within the roster. And I think that was a good thing to do, especially against, frankly, overmatched opponent like Lincoln. One more note on another transfer before we get to just the overall thoughts on what you saw in week one. Seth Cromwell coming in from Missouri Western State University. I Bleav he was the MIAA Conference Freshman of the Year last year. One of my best friends is the play-by-play guy on Mo West, so he gave me the full rundown on Seth. But what did you see in limited action from him last year, or from him last week? Obviously, finding the end zone twice.
Yeah, he scored twice. They're going to be potentially a running back by committee this year. They've got a couple. I mean, their whole running back room is new. They came into this year without a single running back who had ever gotten a carry for NAU, which I tried to look back in the record books. It's been a long time. I couldn't find the exact year, but it had been many years since they didn't have a single guy with a carry in team history. And So it's a whole new room, and it's cool because he and Darvon Hubbard and a guy named Joanne Evans are probably going to be the trio. But Seth Cromwell played really well. He actually was one of the players we interviewed after the game, and he talked about execution and talked about the offense looking good and everything. And again, it bears repeating. We're going to see what it actually looks like against a real Division One opponent when they play in Tucson. But he played pretty well, and their running back room might be in a new offense the newest out of everybody, but it played well. They scored 5 rushing touchdowns as a team, 4 from running backs, 1 from Ty Pennington early in the game, and so if that can keep up, they've got a good chance.
We're talking with Eric Newman of the Arizona Daily Sun, covering the Northern Arizona Lumberjacks up in Flagstaff. And obviously, Arizona versus NAU, 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, a kickoff at Arizona Stadium. That game on ESPN+. NAU coming off a 1-0 start to the season, a 66-6 victory over Lincoln University in California. And Eric, we've talked about it. We've touched on it. Yeah, the opponent was a little bit overmatched in this game, but from an operational standpoint, you've seen a lot of football. What does it look like operationally when a team scores on 8 consecutive possessions? Because Arizona sees that and realizes that they just gave up 39 points to New Mexico, and that's just a little bit scary coming into this one.
Yeah, I mean, they looked like they were executing a game plan really well, and something that had happened under the previous staff was that their defense would play well at points, but the offense at points looked sluggish, and it didn't on Saturday. And I mean that it's silly to say, but that makes a difference. And they seemed to know what they were doing. They knew kind of the exactly what was expected of them, and even without a lot of guys getting a ton of rhythm, they played well. Do I expect them to score 60 points against Arizona? Absolutely. But it would be, it's potentially something that, they have to at least play well defensively, Arizona, to keep it from happening.
And that's a big test for Arizona this week, because the question marks are all surrounding what they gave up through the air and on the ground to a quarterback like Devin Dampier last week. We know Ty Pennington can move a little bit, so that could provide potentially a similar threat for as far as the dual threat quarterback situation. And obviously, look, I mean, not to overlook this game at all, because NAU has come in here and beat Arizona before, but U of A has their eyes on Kansas State next week, and a quarterback in Avery Johnson for the Wildcats that can run 4-3, 4-4. So how much are you seeing from a matchup standpoint, this being another test for Arizona's defense to see if they can, get on the level of a top 25 team facing another mobile quarterback that's coming in with some confidence?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be for Arizona, I'm guessing, a chance to get right? Like um, uh, maybe you're not at the Kansas State level when you're at NAU, but it potentially has kind of the same makings of the mobile quarterback, kind of the same idea that you don't want to call it a practice game because they still have to come out and play well, but it's a potentially something that could bolster Arizona if they play well.
Now, we've touched on Arizona needing to have kind of a get-right game, especially defensively. But for NAU, obviously, the goal is to come in here and compete and give themselves a shot to win. But more than that, what does this do, especially in Game 2 for a new staff, for the development of these players, the development of this program, and just giving you guys a chance to go toe-to-toe with a lot of these highly recruited players at the Power 4 level?
Yeah, a lot of them. There's a good amount of guys who grew up in Arizona or played high school football in Arizona and watched the Wildcats on TV or know about them or took a visit or whatever. And it's a chance to play in that stadium, play against those guys, against a team they know about. Yes, competing too. I mean, it's a game against a level that they probably won't see the rest of the year. And it's a chance to evaluate themselves. There are a couple guys in Canyon Moses, Eamon Allen, who both played on the Wildcats in the past and now are transfers at NAU. There are some guys from Tucson. It's just a fun thing and honestly, Chris Ball, the old coach there, always talked about how they just want to get through it without too many big injuries because they're playing
Right.
against a team with a bunch of guys that are probably bigger than most of the opponents they're going against, and things like that. But it's fun. They would like to compete. Sometimes it is. Most of the time, it's not that competitive a game. We saw last year that it was, what was it, 38-3, I think was the final score a year
Mhm.
ago. And you just want to go there and see what you're made of, and it's a chance to, if you do well, evaluate and come out of it well. If you don't, you throw it away and get back to the FCS season.
Eric Newman, sports editor for the Arizona Daily Sun up in Flagstaff. And you touched on it in this last answer, but just generally speaking, what does this do for football in the state? Seeing NAU play ASU and U of A, getting the D1 programs in the state together on a football level, because I think a lot of people down here still consider this a basketball school with a growing football culture, even though there is a lot of good history both in Tempe and Tucson of high level football, fringing on championship level football. But being able to see these matchups, and for kids in Tucson saying, I can go up and play in flag and come down and have this spotlight game in Tucson, or if it's at ASU, those types of things. Just overall, what does this do for the development and people wanting to stay, high level athletes wanting to stay in the state of Arizona to compete at the college level?
Yeah, not every player that comes out of high school is going to be a starter or contributor on the FBS level. It's difficult. And for some of them who are right there but can't make it, or some people who want a different type of opportunity, there's one in Flagstaff. Daniel Robledo is a guy I look at in this game. He grew up in Tucson, and he went to junior college, went to Missouri, had a couple of stops, and now he's in Flagstaff and is one of the star players for NAU. He's a defensive lineman, and he won't play this week. He's injured, but last year he was able to go and play at Arizona, and it was the first time in 3 or 4 years that his family had been able to come watch a game. They couldn't make the travel all the way out to Mizzou, where he was at in junior college, and that matters for somebody like that. Like, he's playing college and is able to have his family and friends in the stands, and that 2 hour drive from maybe Phoenix or whatever is doable. And yes, it spotlights that there's more options than just the two. And obviously ASU, Arizona are the two powerhouse schools, you want to call them, because they're at a Power 4 level. But it shows that there are other options, and it's fun to see them all getting together.
Yes, indeed. And we're talking with Eric Newman of the Arizona Daily Sun up in Flagstaff. And before we wrap up here, just want to get your keys to the game. What are three maybe matchups or three maybe overarching themes that you're watching on Saturday night in Tucson?
I mean, one has to be if NAU can do anything against McMillan, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if anybody can. I don't know if there's a team in the country that can.
I don't know if there's a lot of
Over
NFL
300
corners
yards.
that can at this
Yeah,
point.
exactly. And so, that type of receiver is somebody that they haven't seen in a long time, and definitely haven't seen this year. And it's a pretty new defense. There's some guys in the linebacker core that have been together. There's Alex McLaughlin is a safety that was a freshman All-American at the FCS level last year. But the defensive back room, the defense overall is pretty new. And so going against somebody of that talent, if they can even limit him a little bit, would be a victory. I don't know that it's even fair to ask them to do that, because maybe nobody can. But that's a really big one. If they can, keep Arizona from scoring every time down the field, it's a silly thing to say, but if they can keep it, that's the way they won the one time that they did beat them, was keep them to 19 points, get some defense, get a defensive score, keep it that way. I don't know. It's hard to say, because it's just a different level of talent. And if Ty Pennington can, in the running game, can chew the clock, make it a low scoring game, I think that's probably the best chance, quote unquote, they have. Again, I don't know if it's fair to even ask them to compete at that level, because it's a different thing. But I think that's what they're going to go in and try to do.
He knows the Lumberjacks like the back of his hand. Eric Newman of the Arizona Daily Sun up in Flagstaff, covering Northern Arizona football as the sports editor for that paper. Eric, thanks so much for the time, and we'll see you down in Tucson.
Absolutely. I appreciate it. I enjoy your show. You do a great job.
Thank you so much. All right, great stuff from Eric Newman there, previewing NAU at Arizona. That's a 7 p.m. kick on ESPN Plus, Arizona Stadium, Saturday night. It's a red out. Wear red. See the Threads in Arizona wearing the red, desert red jerseys under the lights. No better look than that before they go on the road until October 5th when they come home for the Big 12 opener against Texas Tech. So enjoy it while you can, U of A fans, because there's about a month gap in the schedule before they return home to Tucson. All right, let's go through our selections for the weekend for college football. And we start with the Big 12. Of course, Friday night, some of you could be watching this on Saturday, but Friday night, BYU travels to SMU. I'll avoid a pick on that one because it could be out of date by the time you see this. If you're watching before the Arizona game, SMU an 11.5-point favorite as of this recording. Here's an interesting one. Starting off 9 a.m. Arizona time. That's the noon game on ABC, noon Eastern time. Arkansas at Oklahoma State. That's an old Southwest Conference rivalry. And now Oklahoma State comes in as the ranked team and the favorite, an 8-point favorite at home at Boone Pickens Stadium. I liked what I saw from the Pokes against South Dakota State. Obviously, SDSU, FCS powerhouse coming into Stillwater last week and having a lot of high expectations of how they were going to stop the run with Ollie Gordon, stop the pass against Alan Bowman. And Okie State pretty much did what they wanted offensively. I think that's a good sign against an Arkansas team that appears to be in dire straits as far as the SEC conversation is concerned. I know they won last week. I know it was comfortable. Side note, one of my favorite plays of the weekend, Arkansas broke off a long touchdown run, and their running back waved at the Arkansas Pine Bluff cheerleaders as he walked into the end zone. That was pretty funny. Go check out that clip. Absolutely hilarious. One of the best things I saw in week one of the college football season. But Sam Pittman is on the hot seat for a reason for the Hogs. I don't see Arkansas going in and beating Oklahoma State. I think the 8-point line is just a respect for an SEC program coming in. But Oklahoma State is at a different level. The offensive line, veteran-wise, is at a different level. They can play trenches ball, which is what Arkansas will try and exploit with that SEC power. So Oklahoma State can play trenches ball. Oklahoma State may have the best running back in the country in Ollie Gordon, and Oklahoma State has a 17-year senior quarterback in Alan Bowman. Obviously an exaggeration, but not much of an exaggeration. I like Oklahoma State to cover the 8-point spread here. Kansas State at Tulane. Also a noon game, also a 9 a.m. start Arizona time. And this one is really interesting because if any of you have paid attention to college football the past few years, you know that Tulane has been a strong program. Michael Pratt, the quarterback that led that, is gone. So, new sorts of things going on down there in New Orleans. Been a transition for Tulane, but that's a tough team to go play against. And they beat USC in a bowl game a couple years ago, in a New Year's Six bowl game against Caleb Williams. So this is a program that is not just going to roll over for a program like Kansas State. KSU coming in as a 9-point favorite. See, this is one I would look at the total at. 47.5 is the over-under. And, we know historically Tulane can score. We know Kansas State's defense is very good. But I really like this total to go over the number. I think Avery Johnson will be an X factor in this game. I think Dylan Edwards and K-State will be able to run the football. I think this game could rack up a few scores, and I think K-State's in for a dogfight. So while I wouldn't necessarily touch the 9-point favorite for K-State, that over 47.5 looks pretty tantalizing. Pitt at Cincinnati. Here's a really, really interesting one. We get to see exactly where Cincy is coming into week 2. I mean, they looked pretty good last week in week 1, which I didn't necessarily expect. So this team that's projected to be at the bottom of the Big 12 again this year, looked pretty solid coming out in week 1, looked pretty well coached. But here comes Pitt, and here comes a team with high aspirations in the ACC. team coming in at 1-0. So this is a 1-0 versus 1-0 matchup, and it's essentially a pick-em. Cincinnati, a 1.5-point favorite. I'd actually look at Pitt on the money line here, even though it is a road game, even though it is an early game in Cincinnati, noon start Eastern time right there. But the proximity between these programs, the former Big East connection between these programs, and Pitt just having been in more of these big games recently as a power program, I really like Pitt on the road here, and give me the money line for Pittsburgh at plus 105. Here's an interesting one in Salt Lake, a non-conference game between Baylor and Utah. We'll see this next week with Arizona and Kansas State, Big 12 foes playing each other in a non-conference game in Manhattan, Kansas. This week, it's Utah's turn. They had the scheduling alliance with Baylor before the conference shakeup, so they just said, we're going to go with it. We'll call it a non-conference game. That's what Utah's doing with Baylor, and Utah coming in as a 15-point favorite. Look, I think Baylor showed a lot in week one. I think Dave Aranda's a good coach. I think DeQuan Finn is a guy that can come in and be an electric presence at quarterback. But Utah looked really good in their season opening win against Southern Utah. I know it's not anywhere near the level of opponent that should test the Utes, especially with a veteran quarterback like Cam Rising. But they looked really good. They looked really operationally sound and dismantled their opponent in week one. So I like Utah actually to cover the 15 here, even though I believe Baylor is going to be better than a lot of folks project. I think there is a lot of momentum with Utah right now, and Arizona just kind of has to hope that slows down by the time it faces the Utes on September 28th, because Utah looks really, really good right now. And I think Cam Rising is out to prove something to people after missing all of last year with recovery from that knee injury. So give me Utah minus 15, and I know that's a bit of a surprise play right there. Iowa State and Iowa. Now, this is a very, very big game for the Big 12. Huge game for the Big 12, because I think most of you would consider right now that Iowa State is probably 6th or 7th in the pecking order of the Big 12 conference. With West Virginia's loss last week, I think they're a solid 6th. This Iowa State game, the Cyhawk game, is always a battle of defense, always a battle of punts. What you're looking for Iowa State, and the U of A does not play them this year, so it won't affect them directly. But what you're looking for from Iowa State is, can they move the ball effectively against this stellar Iowa defense? Because we know what Iowa has on defense, led by one of the best defensive players in the country in Sebastian Castro, and always it's a very sound defense coordinated by Phil Parker. Iowa State has to be able to move the ball. Rocco Becht showed last year that he can do that. He can be the effective leader for the Cyclones. But now they got to go do it in Iowa City. And this is a mid-afternoon game, a hot Midwestern game in Iowa City. And this is a game where Iowa State needs to come out and show a lot for the Big 12. And if they can, and if the Cyclones can get this win in this in-state rivalry game, that's huge for the Big 12 long term, because Iowa is going to be one of those top 6 teams in the Big 10. I think there's a clear top half of the Big 10 right now, and USC even vaulting higher in that top half with last weekend's win over LSU. I think if Iowa State can go knock them off, that would do wonders for the Big 12 potentially, and I'm not predicting this, but potentially earning a second spot in the college football playoff come December. West Virginia back at home against UAlbany. That's an FCS program coming into Morgantown. This one's not going to be close. ESPN bet doesn't even have a line listed. This is a get-right game, full get-right game for West Virginia. That's on ESPN Plus at 3 o'clock Arizona time. No sweat for the Mountaineers. They improved to 1-1 following last week's loss to a very, very powerful Penn State team. UCF hosting Sam Houston. Sam Houston, another strong opponent at the FCS level. That'll be a 3:30 p.m. Arizona time kickoff in Orlando. Now, KJ Jefferson put something in his locker last week that one of the national commentators claimed another quarterback as the best quarterback in the country. I believe it was Shedeur. Best quarterback in the country, best quarterback in the Big 12. He claimed that Shedeur Sanders was. And KJ Jefferson took that personally. Now, I'm not sure why, because KJ Jefferson is still looking up at Noah Fafita in the grand ranks of Big 12 quarterbacks, but he took that personally, and they went out and walloped an opponent. They'll do the same this week. UCF is a 21.5-point favorite. I think they cover that very easily. I think UCF is tough to play at home, and I don't think this is anywhere near equal competition. We have seen, from Josh Heupel to Scott Frost to now Gus Malzahn, that UCF overwhelms overmatched opponents. They're going to do the same in this game. Lay the 21.5. I know it's a lot of points. I know Sam Houston's a good program. This is UCF's game, and this is where UCF gets its bread and butter. Here's a really, really interesting one. At 4 o'clock Arizona time, 6 p.m. Central, 7 p.m. Eastern on FS1. Kansas at Illinois. Contrasting styles. Lance Leipold, the head coach of Kansas, and Jalen Daniels will try and spread you out. They're going to push down the field. You know who doesn't spread you out, and you know who gets in the trenches and plays tough football? That's Illinois under Brett Bielema. I think the quarterback matchup wins out here. I think Kansas, even being a 5.5 point favorite on the road, is ready to go in and win this game. But there's going to be some nervy moments in Champaign for Kansas. This is, maybe one of their first big road non-conference games with that little shiny number by their name. They're currently ranked 19th in the AP poll. So I think this is a big spot for Kansas to prove they can do it. I don't think it's going to be a comfortable win for Kansas, but there's just too much talent on this KU team. Imagine saying that 10 years ago. There's just too much talent on this KU team to fall to a team like Illinois, who is going to be one of the bottom teams in the Big Ten and is sort of reeling. So right now, give me this 2-0. Give me this 2-0 go for the Big 12 so far against the Big Ten. Because I have Iowa State beating Iowa. I do have Iowa State knocking off Iowa on that plus 150 money line. And I have Kansas minus 5.5 at Illinois. I just think Kansas is the better team. I think Iowa State pulls off a shocker, and the Big 12 goes 2-0 to start the day against the Big 10. Can they make it 3-0? Colorado at Nebraska. No, they cannot. Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter may be two of the best players in the nation, but this Nebraska team is absolutely loaded on the lines of scrimmage, especially the defensive line. Nash Hutmaker, Ty Robinson, Jamari Butler, the depth they have at that defensive line spot will bully this Colorado offensive line again. Colorado showed that it was porous on the offensive line. And even though there was only one sack against Shedeur Sanders in that North Dakota State game, this is a different Nebraska defensive line than you're seeing with an FCS level team. And I know North Dakota State's a great program, but there is not close to the same level of talent and size, conditioning, nutrition, everything like that goes into playing a Power 4 program. Dylan Raiola for Nebraska, the true freshman starting quarterback, showed out in his season debut, in his career debut, going 19 of 27 for 238 yards and 2 touchdowns. Moved in the pocket extremely well. So last year when Colorado beat Nebraska, there was a massive quarterback disparity. This year, I still think Shedeur is better, but I think it's a lot closer. And I think Nebraska's defense was amongst the elite last year, number 8 overall in the nation in yards per play allowed. So I think they stifle this Colorado offense a little bit. I think they find a way to shut down the others outside of Shedeur and Travis Hunter. And I think Nebraska just kind of pulls away in this game with just sheer physicality, probably running for over 200 yards and putting a little bit of a beatdown on Colorado. I have this being a 2+ touchdown victory for Nebraska in Lincoln in what should be a juiced up night game atmosphere at Memorial Stadium. One of the biggest home games there in the last 10 years. Houston taking on Oklahoma. OU a 29-point favorite, and Houston coming off that dreadful 20-point home loss to UNLV. The Cougars may be one of the worst teams in Power 4 this year, and possibly one of the worst teams in college football. This UNLV team was not expected to win the Mountain West, expected to contend, was receiving votes to start the season and everything like that, but was not expected to win the Mountain West and just went into Houston and bullied them in week 1. OU looked pristine against an overmatched Temple team in a weeknight game last week. I think this is going to be ugly. I think this is going to be very ugly all the way throughout because, Houston looked bad last week, and Oklahoma looks like they're clicking on all cylinders with Jackson Arnold and those stellar deep ball wide receivers. TCU, Long Island. It's another game that doesn't have a line. don't take it, don't touch it. TCU winning this game easily, no question, massive talent disparity. We'll skip Arizona NAU for later in the show after we do our marquee matchups, but Washington State and Texas Tech. Now, here's an interesting one. Can Texas Tech, after narrowly escaping against Abilene Christian, go into Washington State and win what they are dubbing to be the Pirate Bowl? The late Mike Leach coached for both of these programs, and I know there's going to be tributes and a lot of respect going all the way through for Mike Leach up there in Pullman. I think it'll be a really, really touching atmosphere. Take a look at those tribute videos. It should be fun. And it should really also be a very competitive game on the field. Look, this is a Texas Tech team that had a wake-up call against a good ACU program last week, but an ACU program that it should fully overmatch. And Tech did what it traditionally does, play a lot of offense and not a lot of defense. I think that changes a little bit this week. I actually really, really like Texas Tech in this game. They're plus 110 on the money line. I know it's basically a road game. I know it's basically a road line, I should say, a road spread with Washington favored by 2.5. But I really, really, really like Texas Tech to go on the road and knock off the Cougs. I think that's another big win for the Big 12 on the road, and things continue. Mississippi State at ASU. Boy, as big a game as Kenny Dillingham has had so far in his Sun Devil career, an SEC program coming in that Arizona lost to on the road last year. Arizona lost to Mississippi State in Starkville in overtime in a game where there was a lot of tough decision-making by Jaden DeLaura, and it ultimately led to the U of A's demise. So don't you think ASU would be putting a little feather in their cap if they could beat the team that knocked off U of A last year, even though ASU gave up a record-setting performance to U of A? I don't know. It's interesting. Biggest home game for ASU in a very long time. Biggest home game for ASU in a very long time. They looked good last week. Look, I know you hate to hear it, but the Sun Devils looked darn good against Wyoming. But that was not what I was expecting to see with Wyoming. I was not expecting head coach Jay Savell's debut to go so poorly. You know, a pick six on one of the very first plays of the game, and Wyoming's offense just never got it going. The ASU transfers looked pretty good on the defensive side of the ball. Things looked cleaner with Sam Levitt at quarterback. This ASU team is not going to be a pushover this year. I don't see them a top half of the Big 12 team, but they're not going to be a pushover this year like they were for long stretches of last season. However, I can't pick ASU over an SEC program. I think Mississippi State knows what's ahead of them. I think, with a new head coach and Jeff Levy, I think they have to set their foundation. They know what they have ahead of them in the SEC, and they know how tough this conference is going to be this year with the additions of Texas and Oklahoma. I see Mississippi State coming in, playing a little bully ball with this ASU team. And right now, it's a 5.5-point favorite. ASU is a 5.5-point favorite in this game, and Mississippi State is plus 180 on the money line. I know there's a lot of juice up in Tempe, a lot of optimism for this Sun Devil team, but I just don't think they're ready as a program in year 2 of Kenny Dillingham to knock off a solid SEC program like Mississippi State. So sprinkle that 180 money line. And like the 180 money line, because that's some good value right there if you're picking against ASU, which I know people down here in Tucson are so apt and so happy to do. All right, let's go to our marquee matchups of the weekend. Starting off with the big noon kickoff game, noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Arizona time on Fox. That's Texas at Michigan. Both teams were in the college football playoff a year ago, and now we get to see at the Big House, at Michigan Stadium, exactly what this new Michigan team is made of. Texas looked extremely impressive last week against Colorado State. We know what they have speed-wise on the outside. It's overwhelming. We know what they have with Quinn Ewers, a good quarterback who can go on the road, as we saw last year, and win against a team like Alabama. Do I believe in this Michigan team? Do I believe that Michigan is going to be a true Big Ten title contender, a true college football playoff contender? I don't know, because they don't have the quarterback situation figured out. Donovan Edwards is a really, really darn good running back, but I think they needed the two-headed monster of Edwards and Blake Corum last year to have the success they did in the run game. And at wide receiver, they're lacking what they had last year in a Roman Wilson. Obviously, they have an elite weapon at tight end in Colston Loveland, and an elite defense and one of the best defensive players in the country in Will Campbell. But Texas is just so good. This is a hard game to pick. And right now, Texas is a 7.5-point favorite. The over-under is 42.5, which some of you may want to sprinkle because of that Michigan defense. I would maybe avoid the 42.5, but here's my shocker pick of the week. I think Michigan as a plus 230 money line underdog. I think Michigan pulls off a shocker here. I think it's a pride thing, especially since did not look good against Fresno State to start the season last week. But I think it's a pride thing. You don't just come into the national champion's house and walk out with a win. And even though Texas, I think, is more talented, is faster, I think there's just something about the true dogged grit of this Michigan program that's ready for this. I also think Michigan is more comfortable as a team and as a program playing in a tight back and forth game. And one thing that stuck out to me last year was their lack of flinch in their two biggest games of the season. Obviously, the national championship game was the biggest game of the season. But outside of that, the lack of flinch in their two biggest games of the season. They trailed against Ohio State and didn't flinch. They trailed late against Alabama and didn't flinch against the team that's been the top dog of college football for the past decade. Michigan at home is not going to flinch against Texas, is not going to panic. And I think Sharon Moore gets an early signature win. I think Michigan says to college football, we're back, and you don't just come into our house and get a win. And it's a huge one for the Big Ten over the SEC. The SEC has disappointed a little bit to start this season. Let's keep it on rolling. Georgia Tech at Syracuse. I think this is a really interesting one because GT is coming off a win over Florida State in the season opener, obviously winning the week 1 game against a much overmatched opponent as well at home. But Georgia Tech still riding the high, riding the momentum of that week 0 win over Florida State in Ireland, taking on a Syracuse team that feels really good with where they're at with new transfer quarterback Kyle McCord from Syracuse. I think this is going to be a really interesting game. I actually have Syracuse pulling this out. Syracuse is a 3-point dog. I'll take them plus 130 on the money line. So we continue my train of upsets so far in this pick'em right here because I have Syracuse knocking off Georgia Tech at home. Tennessee, NC State. I think this is an extremely fun matchup. NC State had to do a lot to survive against Western Carolina on the opening night of the season. Tennessee has one of the best quarterbacks in the nation in redshirt freshman Nico Iamaleava. Let's try this again. Nico Iamaleava. Nico Iamaleava. That's how you say his name. I've said it 3 times. I said it 3 times before this podcast to make sure I got it right. We'll just call him Nico from first reference to here on out. Nico's a heck of a quarterback. I think Tennessee has a super high ceiling in the SEC this year. They have a super tough schedule, but I really, really, really like what this Tennessee team can do on offense. And it looks like what Josh Heupel was able to create, a couple years ago with Hendon Hooker in this offense before he tore his ACL, after that incredible win at Neyland against Alabama. I really like this Tennessee offense. Tennessee did not show me enough, NC State did not show me enough last week, even fighting back to beat Western Carolina, did not show me enough last week to be at all confident in where they're at as a team. I know they're well coached. I know they're well quarterbacked with Grayson McCall. But I really think Tennessee goes in and rolls in Raleigh. So for the Duke's Mayo Classic, give me Tennessee minus 10 over NC State. And the last game we have on the docket is a fun one out west, Boise State and Oregon. And I think this is a really interesting matchup. Ashton Jeanty from Boise State was one of the national players of the week, along with Teteroa McMillan for Arizona, because he scored a lot. I think he scored 6 touchdowns against Georgia Southern. I mean, that was an incredible performance on the road for Boise State. And here's the flip side of this. Oregon did not look good against an FCS Idaho team. Idaho came into the game and mucked that thing up. And the crazy part is, they did all of that with Dillon Gabriel going 41 for 48 through the air, over 300 yards passing. 41 for 48 through the air. And Idaho was still able to keep Oregon to 24 points. Sound the alarm bells. But look, Boise's defense did not look good last week. And I think this is a Boise team that could go in and win the Mountain West. But, I think this is a real get-right game for Oregon at this stage. I wouldn't touch the 19.5. Oregon is a 19.5, 20-point favorite. They would have to win by 20 to cover this spread. I don't like that. I think Oregon wins this game. I think Oregon shows a little bit more, but I think Boise covers. I think the Boise covering that plus 19.5 is the easy play here, especially because they showed they're going to be one of the power programs in the Mountain West. Oregon showed some cracks in the foundation last week. So I think we're all just assuming Oregon gets right in a huge way, like it's done so many times in years past. We could see some real flaws in this Oregon team. I don't think they're going to lose this game. I don't think they're ever really going to be in major danger of losing this game, but I don't see a blowout. And I think we still see this Oregon team kind of just figuring it out with this relationship with Dan Lanning and Dillon Gabriel. I think we just see Oregon putting it together a little bit, but I don't think Band-Aid, everything fixed against a good opponent. I think Boise State, who Oregon has never beaten, by the way, that's the crazy part. Oregon is 0-3 all time against Boise State. But I think Boise goes in there, makes this a game, mucks it up a little bit, and Oregon wins by probably 2 touchdowns. But I have Boise State covering that spread. All right, here we go. Arizona, NAU. There is no line on this game via ESPN Bet. Let me double check that just to make sure. It doesn't look like it. Nope, no line available via ESPN Bet because this is going to be a comfortable Arizona win. Here's what I want to see from the U of A in this game. I want to see better defense. I want to see sound run defense, bottle up Seth Cromwell, establish what they want to do on first and second down. Do not let NAU beat you on first and second down. Put them in third down situations. NAU will complete a few third downs. It'll happen. There's talent on this team. They have a lot of confidence from putting up 66 points against Lincoln last week. NAU will complete some third downs. They'll move the ball down the field a little bit, but make it hard. Extend these drives. The most concerning part of the defense for me last week against New Mexico was Arizona's inability to stop the bleeding. It wasn't that New Mexico got yards or points. It was the succession at which they got those yards and points. So Arizona's got to stop the bleeding, slow things down this week on defense. On offense, looking for another huge game from Teteroa McMillan, but I would like for them to rely on T-Mac a little bit less. They know they can beat NAU by 35 or 40 points without a heroic performance from Teteroa McMillan. So prove it. Prove that you can get 4 to 5 yards running on first down. Prove that Malachi Riley can be a solid number 2 threat. Prove that Montana Lamonius Craig is back and ready to be a consistent contributor this year. Prove that teams have to scout Jeremiah Patterson and Raymello Murphy in the slot. Prove that there's depth with Devin Hyatt and Rex Haynes. Prove that you can get all these guys in here, and prove that Jonah Savanaya is just as scary at left tackle as he is at right. I think if all of that happens, I think if everything comes to fruition on that front, I think Arizona is comfortable. I think Arizona has a strong win. I think Arizona has a really sound defensive win, gets a lot of those depth guys in early in the third quarter, and feeling a lot better heading into that K-State game next Friday. So what I'm looking for Arizona, a feel-good win. Give me Arizona 48, Northern Arizona 6. You keep them out of the end zone, you're feeling pretty good on Sunday, really. You might as well enjoy it for 2 days because it's a short week going into K-State next Friday night in Manhattan. All right, that'll do it for this edition of the Bleav in Arizona podcast. Feel free to like and subscribe on YouTube, as well as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, or wherever you get your podcasts. That's BLEAV in Arizona. We'll be back on Sunday for another Sunday six-pack recapping Arizona and Northern Arizona from Arizona Stadium in Tucson. Kickoff just after 7 p.m. in Tucson on Saturday night. Under the lights, it's a red out. Wear red if you're going to the game. And that'll do it for me until Sunday. Enjoy the game, enjoy the weekend, and bear down.